The K9 froze at the ravine's edge, ears sharp, tail like a steel rod. The rookie officer stumbled behind, her flashlight slicing through the fog of a chilly Oregon dawn. That's when they saw her. An elderly woman, hands bound, face ghost white, her breath a faint rasp. A single patch clung to her tattered jacket, 82nd Airborne. What the dog did next didn't just stop a small town's whispers, it sparked a reckoning that brought a forgotten hero home. If stories of loyalty and redemption hit you in the gut, smash that subscribe button and drop honor in the comments if you're still with us. It was 5:32 a.m. in Willow Creek, a sleepy town tucked between cedar forests and the winding Deschutes River. Officer Mia Torres, barely 3 months into her badge, tugged gently on the leash of her K9 partner, a Belgian Malinois named Blitz. They were on a routine patrol along the old quarry trail, a rugged path locals avoided after dusk. Blitz had been restless all morning, his nose twitching at every gust of wind. Now he stood rigid, eyes locked on something beyond the mist-soaked cedars. "Blitz, what's got you, boy?" Mia whispered, her breath clouding in the cold. The dog didn't budge, just took 3 slow, deliberate steps toward a gnarled cedar tree and froze, hackles up. There, slumped against the trunk, was a woman. Her wrists were bound with duct tape, her silver hair matted with dirt and pine needles. Her lips were cracked, her face sunken, and for a heart-stopping moment, Mia thought she was gone. Then, a shallow shudder of breath. Alive. Mia dropped to her knees, her radio crackling. "Dispatch, Torres. I've got a female, elderly, restrained near Quarry Trail, mile marker 7. EMS, now. Possible dehydration, hypothermia." She shrugged off her department-issued jacket, draping it over the woman's trembling shoulders. The woman's eyes fluttered, unfocused, staring through Mia like she was a ghost. As Mia checked for injuries, her fingers brushed a faded patch on the jacket. 82nd Airborne Division. A veteran. Mia's father had served in the same division, Desert Storm. Her throat tightened. This wasn't just a call. This was personal. Sheriff Dan Carver's cruiser skidded to a stop 12 minutes later, gravel spraying. EMS was already there, cutting the tape, easing the woman onto a stretcher. She hadn't spoken, just clutched Mia's jacket like it was the only thing tethering her to the world. "Any ID?" Dan asked, his voice gruff as he scanned the scene. "Nothing," Mia replied, her hand still shaking. "No purse, no phone, just this." She handed him the patch, carefully peeled from the jacket. Dan turned it over in his calloused palm, his jaw tightening. Blitz sat a few feet away, eyes locked on the tree, as if guarding an invisible line. Mia noticed. "He's not letting this go, Sheriff." Dan nodded, his gaze distant. "He knows something we don't. Dogs like that always do." By 8 a.m., Willow Creek was alive with chatter. Small towns don't miss a beat. At the Rusty Spoon Diner, a cashier leaned over the counter, whispering. "They found an old lady tied up out by the quarry. Half dead, they say." A trucker at the counter snorted. Probably some drifter who got lost. But the patch changed the narrative. "Military," another voice added. 82nd Airborne, like my granddad." By noon, a local news van was parked outside the sheriff's office, a reporter pacing with a mic. Dan waved them off, his face stone. "No name, no comment. Not till we know who she is." Inside the station, Mia poured herself a cup of burnt coffee, her hands unsteady. The woman's eyes haunted her, hollow, like they'd seen too much to believe in rescue. At Willow Creek Medical, the woman was stable but silent, hooked to an IV. No ID, just bruises on her wrists and that patch. She didn't wander out there, Mia told Dan, leaning against the doorframe of his cluttered office. Someone did this, planned it. Dan rubbed his temples, his chair creaking. "I know. But who?" And why her? He glanced at a photo on his desk. Him and his brother, both in uniform, years ago. If she's military, she's got a story. We need to find it. Out in the K9 pen behind the station, Blitz paced, ignoring his kibble. Every time the back door creaked open, he snapped his head toward the quarry trail, whining low. He wants to go back, Mia said, watching him through the window. Dan looked up from a stack of reports. Take him. Let's see what he's chasing. It was a nurse who found the first clue. During a routine check, she spotted a faded tattoo on the woman's forearm. Eleanor M. Vance, 31268. She jotted it down, passed it to the attending doctor, who called the station. By 2 p.m., Dan was in room 108 at Willow Creek Medical, the air thick with antiseptic. Eleanor, her name now known, lay still, eyes closed, an IV dripping steadily. Scrapes marred her hands, and a bruise bloomed across her cheek, like she'd been dragged across rough ground. Dan pulled a chair close, its legs scraping the linoleum. Eleanor Vance, he said softly, as if testing the name. Army, 82nd Airborne, retired captain, served in Desert Storm. Silver Star for pulling 2 soldiers from a burning Humvee under fire. He paused, watching her face for any flicker. Nothing. He unfolded a printout, a grainy photo from a 2010 Veterans Day parade in Willow Creek. Eleanor, in crisp uniform, waving from a float, her smile bright. Back then, she was a local legend, a fixture at community events. Back then, she had a home. Dan sent Mia and Deputy Nate Brooks to check the address tied to Eleanor's name, a craftsman bungalow on Riverbend Lane, just outside town. The house was a ghost of itself. Windows boarded, porch sagging, the front yard choked with weeds. Inside, it looked like a crime scene. Drawers yanked open, a shattered lamp on the floor, a walker tipped over in the hall. In the kitchen, Mia found a single photo frame, empty, its glass cracked. Nate crouched near the fireplace, pointing to burn marks. Someone was torching papers here, in a hurry. Mia's stomach twisted. This wasn't neglect. This was theft, calculated and cruel. Back at the hospital, Eleanor stirred for the first time. Her lips moved, barely audible. Mia, who'd been sitting vigil, leaned in. "Did Blitz find me?" Eleanor rasped, her voice like dry leaves. Mia's breath caught. "Yeah, he did," she whispered, squeezing Eleanor's hand gently. "He's a good boy." Eleanor's eyes closed again, but a faint smile lingered. The next morning, Dan took Blitz back to the quarry trail. The K9 leapt from the cruiser before Dan could unclip his leash, nose to the ground, tail high. The forest was quiet, sunlight piercing the canopy of cedars and firs. At the gnarled cedar where Eleanor was found, Blitz circled, sniffing intently, then bolted west through a tangle of ferns and underbrush. Dan jogged to keep up, his boots sinking into the damp earth, heart pounding harder than he'd admit. 50 yards out, Blitz stopped, pawing at a pile of leaves and pine needles. Dan knelt, brushing dirt aside with gloved hands. A canvas satchel, half buried, its zipper rusted. Inside, a thermos, a dog-eared photo of Eleanor with her unit in Desert Storm, a notarized document, a house key, and a small folded American flag. Dan unfolded the document, his voice low. Power of attorney, Eleanor Vance to Caleb Vance. Caleb, her grandson, barely 30. Records Mia pulled later showed he'd claimed guardianship a year ago, citing Eleanor's dementia. He'd sold the Riverbend house 6 months later to a shell company, also tied to his name. Dan clutched the photo. Eleanor, young, grinning with her squad in fatigues, sand dunes behind them. On the back, in faded Sharpie. "We came home. That's the win." Blitz whined, nudging the satchel with his nose. Dan patted his head, his voice soft. "You didn't just find her, did you, boy? You found her life." He slung the satchel over his shoulder and started back, the weight of it heavier than canvas and paper. At the Rusty Spoon Diner, Dan faced Caleb Vance. The kid, because that's what he was to Dan, a kid, sat in a corner booth, sipping an energy drink, his Apple Watch glinting under the fluorescent lights. He wore a crisp polo, his hair gelled, keys to a shiny Jeep on the table. He smirked when Dan slid into the booth. "Sheriff Carver, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Dan didn't smile. He laid the power of attorney on the table, followed by the photo. "Your grandmother. Found her tied to a tree, left to die. You sold her house out from under her." Caleb's smirk flickered, but he leaned back, crossing his arms. "She wasn't right in the head, Sheriff. Hadn't been for years. I was protecting her assets, like she wanted." Dan's eyes narrowed. "Protecting them by dumping her in the woods?" He tapped the photo. "She saved lives, risked hers for others. You stole her home." Caleb stood, his voice low, sharp. "You've got no proof of anything." Dan didn't flinch. "Maybe not the kind that locks you up. But I've got a town that remembers Eleanor, a VFW post asking questions, and a K9 that led us to your lies." Caleb glanced out the window, his confidence cracking. Across the street, a dozen veterans stood by their trucks, arms crossed, faces hard. No signs, no shouting, just presence. Dan tapped the table once. "Sign the house back over. Return the money. Every cent. Or they'll make sure your name's mud from here to Portland." Caleb laughed, but it was hollow. "And if I don't?" Dan nodded toward the window. "They served with her. They know what loyalty looks like. You don't want them telling your story." Caleb's jaw tightened. He grabbed his keys and stormed out. But Dan saw the fear in his eyes. The veterans didn't move, just watched him peel out of the lot. By Thursday, the bungalow on Riverbend Lane was Eleanor's again. Caleb didn't fight it. Word spread he'd left for Portland before the ink dried, his Jeep spotted crossing the county line. The town didn't wait for formalities. A flyer appeared on the community center's bulletin board. Riverbend House Cleanup, Saturday, 7 a.m. No RSVP, just an address and a purpose. By sunrise, the street was packed. Neighbors brought paint cans and brooms. Teens hauled debris to a dumpster donated by a local contractor. A hardware store owner dropped off lumber and supplies, his note simple. For Ellie. From Mike, 82nd, 91. Eleanor sat on the porch, still frail, bundled in a quilt. Blitz sprawled at her feet. Nurse Sarah, who'd been with her since the hospital, handed her a mug of coffee. "This too much for you, Ellie?" she asked. Eleanor shook her head, her eyes bright. "Thought I was invisible," she said, her voice stronger now. "Guess I was wrong." The cleanup wasn't just about the house. It was about memory. Old-timers swapped stories as they painted the porch. Eleanor at the VFW, teaching kids to salute the flag. Eleanor at the county fair, judging pie contests with a grin. A high schooler, sanding a banister, admitted he'd only come for extra credit, but stayed because it felt right. Mia, on her day off, wielded a paint roller, her K9 vest swapped for a flannel. She caught Eleanor's eye and nodded. Eleanor nodded back, a silent thank you. Eleanor pulled the old photo from her pocket, the one from the satchel. She studied it, then scribbled a note on the back with a pen Sarah lent her. She handed it over. "Seen again. Finally home." Sarah read it, her throat tight, and tucked it away. Down the street, someone fired up a BBQ, the smell of burgers drifting. Someone else dragged out folding chairs. It wasn't a party. It was a community piecing itself back together, stitch by stitch. The next Sunday, Willow Creek held a ceremony at the VFW Hall, a low brick building where the town honored its own. Eleanor sat in the front row in a pressed blazer, her hair neatly pinned, Blitz beside her, his K9 vest polished to a shine. Dan stepped to the mic, his voice steady but thick. Some heroes don't ask for statues. They serve, they sacrifice, and sometimes we let them slip through the cracks. Not this time. He handed Eleanor a plaque, engraved with care. Eleanor M. Vance, 82nd Airborne, seen and honored. The crowd stood, no applause, just a quiet wave of respect. Veterans approached, leaving tokens, a challenge coin, a unit patch, a letter folded tight. One man, grizzled and limping, pressed a folded flag into her hands. "From my brother," he said. "He knew you over there." Then Blitz stole the show. Mia knelt, clipping a custom medallion to his collar. "For finding what we almost lost," she said, her voice breaking. Blitz didn't understand the words, but when he rested his head on Eleanor's knee, the room felt it. No cameras, no fanfare, just a moment that didn't need embellishment. That night, the porch light on Riverbend Lane glowed, steady and warm. Eleanor sat in a rocking chair, the quilt around her shoulders. Blitz sprawled at her feet, off duty, his belly full. Sarah stopped by with a thermos of soup and a note. "Your mom's recipe. Your family now." Eleanor smiled, gazing at the stars, brighter than she remembered. "You found me, Blitz," she murmured, scratching behind his ears. The dog's tail thumped once, then he drifted to sleep. The night was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was home. The next morning, Mia walked the quarry trail alone, Blitz at her side. She stopped at the cedar tree, now just a tree again. She thought of her dad, his old stories of the 82nd, how he'd said the real fight was coming home. She looked at Blitz, his ears up, ready for the next call. "You're more than a tracker, aren't you?" she said. He tilted his head, eyes bright. Mia smiled. Some heroes, human or hound, never stop serving. If you believe heroes deserve to be seen, whether they wear a badge, a uniform, or a collar, hit subscribe and share this story. Let's keep their light on